Don't make these mistakes. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to go over mistakes that can be made while turning a recessed mortise. Now you probably know that I don't turn a lot of recessed mortises, but I do make them on occasion. I've got a video about how to properly turn a recessed mortise. Today we're going to talk about some of the things that can happen that would make your recessed mortise fail. Now, obviously we don't want to do these things, but we have to be aware of them first to understand not to do them. So I'm going to show you a variety of different techniques not to use with your recessed mortise, and I'll explain why you don't want to use those as well. I'm going to start by using some waste wood. And what I mean by waste wood is wood that is relatively inexpensive, that I'm not very concerned with what happens to that. I'm not trying to turn bowls right now. I'm showing you this too because I recommend doing this for the various online courses that I have. If you're able to make inexpensive blanks that you can simply practice with, it takes a lot of the pressure away from turning. The worst thing you could do is have a really beautiful piece of wood and not have all your skills up to speed yet. Instead, what you want is a piece of wood you're not really worried about. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a 2x6. It's a simple piece of lumber. It costs a few dollars at the hardware store. I can get a bunch of blanks out of this, trim out those circles, and all of a sudden I've got material to go work with. And these are going to be great for doing the examples that I'm going to show you today because I don't want to waste good wood. I'm going to intentionally show you improper techniques here so that you learn from this and learn from these examples. So I know that these are not going to turn out great. So this is a perfect example for using waste wood. So I'm using my faceplate to mount these blanks to the lathe. And what I'm going to do to each one of these is I'm simply going to square up the edges. I'm using my 1/2" 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. And then I'm going to apply a curve. This would be the exterior curve of the bowl to the outside. Again, I'm making push cuts going from right to left. I've got my nose of the bowl gouge angled in the direction of the cut. Just quickly shaping these. I'm not really trying to make anything that looks great. I just want to give you guys a really good example of what not to do when doing a recessed mortise. All right, I'm going to use my dividers. I straddle the center portion and just touch the left divider, and I have the right divider point over it, and I make sure that lines up. So now that I know how big I need to make my recessed mortise, I'm going to start creating the first recessed mortise. Now, for this one, I'm just going to use my bowl gouge. I'm going to scoop out some material. I'm using the left wing here as a scraper to do a scraping cut. I'm going to make a nice deep mortise. That way I know I've got a good connection, right? All right, so I also have a wide parting tool that I'm going to be using periodically throughout this video. I'm going to straighten up that edge so it's nice and straight and it's good and deep here. I just want to make sure that I've got plenty of openings to make a really nice recessed mortise so we'll be set. Now, there are several things incorrect with this mortise, or several things that could be improved. Let's put it that way. Let's see if you can figure them out. All right, first off, I'm bottoming out on the 4-jaw chuck. The bottom portion of the chuck that's touching the bottom of the bowl right there is never intended to touch the wood. Instead, the only portions of the chuck that should be touching the wood are the top of the jaws and the side of the jaws. As you can see here, the base of the jaws are touching the wood. That's a big no-no. That part of the chuck is not engineered to keep that wood perfectly straight. So I'm switching to my 5/8" 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm getting really aggressive here because I want to intentionally make the bull gouge grab the surface to imitate what a catch would be like. So if you set up an improper base to your, or improper mortise to your bowl, and you got a catch, this is something that can happen. And oops, I've got a catch there, and I actually just slipped on the lathe. The mortise is deep enough that it didn't actually fly off, but it slipped inside that because there was no angle. I did not match the angle of the dovetails on the 4-jaw chuck. Plus, I made it so deep that there's a hole in the bottom of it now. So the problem with that first piece was that the mortise was too deep, the sides were not angled, and I was bottoming out, which is a big no-no. So I'm going to set up the next blank, and we'll see what we can do with this one. Simply rounding off that exterior curve just to give this bowl a little bit of shape. Now the faceplate has a little bit wider diameter than the chuck, so the screws are wide of that mortise that we're making, so I'm not really too concerned with hitting those screws. So for this recessed mortise, I'm going to use my 1/2-inch bull gouge, and that's it. I'm just going to use the bull gouge. I'm not going to make a deep recessed mortise like the last one. You can obviously see that was too deep. For this one, I'm just going to make one that's about the right depth, and we'll see how this turns out. I'm going to attach this to the chuck. Now, this could be a little bit deeper, but there's a reason why those jaws aren't reaching much deeper in there. I'm going to jump back over to my 1/2-inch bull gouge. And boom, it's off. It didn't take much to get that off the lathe. Well, you can see why. There's no sides on that mortise, and they weren't cut as a dovetail. We really need to make walls, interior walls on the recessed mortise that match the angle of the dovetail of your jaws. It's that simple. A proper recessed mortise will seat on top of the jaws, and the sides of the jaws will grip into the side of the recessed mortise, and it will not bottom out like the first example either. So we're going to round off our third one here. Mark it off with the dividers. And you see there, I'm not letting that right side touch. It would be really bad if that happened. I'm going to use this wide parting tool again just to plow away some material. And instead of having that rounded corner like we did on the last one, I'm going to make a straight corner here. And we're going to set the depth to about, I don't know, almost 1/4 inch. It's the proper depth, but we still have another issue going on. Can you see what that issue is? I've already mentioned it. Let's see if you figure it out. So this looks like a proper recessed mortise. This looks like it could work. So I'm going to mount that to the chuck.
You could do me a huge favor by clicking that like button if you're liking this video. Thank you.
Now keep in mind, if you are making light, delicate cuts, you can get away with an improperly mounted blank. But as you can see there, if you hit any kind of catch, you're going to have problems. This popped right off the lathe, but it's not damaged, so I'm going to remount it and try again. Now I'm using my larger bowl blank so that I can make an aggressive pass and simulate a catch. This is not something you would be doing all the time, but if you did get a catch, that's what you could expect. So the problem with this is the inside walls are not angled to match the dovetails of the chuck. All right, let's try another one here. Going to round this off. This is another common problem. This is another reason why I really prefer using a tenon and mortise, or I'm sorry, a tenon and shoulder rather than a mortise. The tenon gives me a lot of flexibility to really refine the bottom of a bowl. Like right here, I'm starting to create a shape that I like, and it's looking good. If I had a tenon and a shoulder on there, I'd be okay. Instead, I'm going to do a mortise here. I'm going to take my time and I'm going to make a perfect mortise. I'm going to get the depth right, and I'm going to put a dovetailed angle on these inside walls. So everything should be great, right? You probably see what the issue is at this point. So we've got the depth is just right. Plowed that out with the parting tool. Now I'm going to switch to my spindle detail gouge, and I'm going to back cut those walls so they're angled to match the dovetail angle. So that dovetail is going to lock right in. No problems, right? What could possibly go wrong? It looks really good. All right, I'm going to attach this. I'm going to expand those jaws. It's holding firm. I think we've got one here, guys. What do you think? All right, so I'm going to make some aggressive cuts here, and also, again, to simulate what might happen if you have a catch. Boom. That didn't last long. All right, so what happened? Everything was made right. Yeah, well, that's the other issue with recessed mortises. You have to have plenty of room around and material around that mortise, or it will simply give way under any kind of pressure. All right, so let's take a look at these. The deep mortise, that was bottoming out on the chuck, and it took a ton of space away from the bottom of the bowl, and of course we punched through there when we were turning it. So obviously a deep, straight-walled, bottoming out mortise is not the way to go. Okay, let's take a look at our second example. The depth of this one is about right, but those side walls are rounded, and there's no way for the dovetail jaws to grip into that rounded curve. It's not even straight, so there's only a little lip along the edge that could possibly grip, and it didn't take much for this to dislodge and go bouncing across the shop. So this is not a way to go. We need to make sure we've got that dovetail angle and those sidewalls established really well. All right, so let's look at the third example. This one looks pretty good, and this is a pretty typical looking recessed mortise. The depth is fine, the size is fine. You've got nice clean sidewalls. The problem is these sidewalls are not angled for the four-jaw chuck. So if there's any catch or any friction anywhere, it's simply going to jump right off the chuck and go flying. So this too, even though it looks a lot better, is not good enough. Now let's look at our final one. This one, we made the recessed mortise perfect. The size was right, the depth was right, we have the inside angles. However, the material and the space and the amount of material around that mortise was not adequate enough to support the connection. So whenever there was any tension or a catch, that's just simply going to break away the weakest part around that recessed mortise like you see here. And you can see where it just leveled it off and separated from the lathe and went flying. So these are 4 examples of what not to do when you're making recessed mortises. So hopefully this has helped you.
Okay, hopefully those examples gave you food for thought. Perhaps you've done some of these things in the past and now you know what happened and why it happened.
Or maybe you're doing something else that's causing issues while turning recessed mortises. If you are, do me a favor and leave a comment below and explain to me what issues you're having with your recessed mortise, or let me know if you've done any of these fails before and what your experience was. Be sure to be safe on the lathe. Stay out of the line of fire. Don't be directly in the rotation path of your turning. Work from one side or the other. There are occasions when you do need to work right in front of it. Just be extra cautious when that happens. Be sure that you've read all your safety instructions from your lathe. Every lathe has different specific requirements. You're going to want to know those, as well as general safety requirements. And of course, always wear all your safety gear. Now, that means safety glasses and a full face shield, not one or the other. That's not optional. The face shield will disperse the energy of something hitting you, and it will spread that energy out. It's still going to flex and allow something to hit you, and it hurts. I don't know how I know this, but I know this. So trust me, you want those safety glasses on as well, because if you do have something impact your eye area, you want that extra protection. Again, the full face shield will not 100% protect you. So a little word of safety there. Make sure you are wearing safety glasses and a full face shield at all times when you're turning. Try to avoid the different examples that I showed you here today, and you won't have any issues. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the video. I greatly appreciate that. It helps the channel, it helps everything out, and I thank you for taking a moment to do that. Also, be sure to check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got tons of information about turning wood bowls, and you're not going to want to miss it. So go check out turnawoodbowl.com. Okay, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy turning.